Can you believe faking paralysis for years? Like living your whole life in a wheelchair, only to get busted by one single damning photo? Seriously, this isn't some made-up movie plot. This is the absolutely wild truth about a $600,000 scam that seriously shook up the justice system. It really makes you wonder what you can even trust these days, right? Hey, I'm your host. I've kind of made it my thing to dig into those stories that don't always make the big headlines, you know. The ones where the news just gives you the super short version. Today, we're diving deep into what all the official paperwork completely missed. So, for the next 18 minutes or so, you're gonna see exactly how one guy cooked up this huge, elaborate lie. We'll get into the insane evidence that finally brought it all crashing down, and honestly, the really creepy stuff it means for how we trust our courts. It all started with a claim. Some terrible accident, his life totally changed forever, a guy left paralyzed. He told this whole story about constant agony, about not being able to move, and it was so believable. He raked in over $600,000 in benefits. And this wasn't just some small-time grift. We're talking about money that's supposed to help people who really need it, right? Funds that got swiped because this dude was just that bold. This insane amount of cash doesn't just affect him. It messes with the whole idea of systems designed to actually help folks who are struggling. The whole show went down in courtrooms, where his tearful stories and all the doctor's notes built this wall that seemed impossible to break. He became the poster child for a tragic victim, his whole story a masterclass in tugging heartstrings. The Social Security Administration, plus other groups, they bought the evidence hook, line, and sinker. Lawyers argued his side, judges listened, and everyone saw a man stuck in a wheelchair, his future apparently destroyed by one single event. This was like the perfect lie. For years, he kept up the act, a performance that deserved an award, fooling doctors, lawyers, even the judges themselves. The deception was so deep, so much a part of his everyday life that you could barely see any cracks. But you know, even with its blind spots, the system does eventually find ways to uncover the truth. The FBI and investigative reporters are always on the lookout for these huge schemes, which, by the way, cost us billions every year. Source: FBI. It takes some seriously detailed detective work, putting together tiny bits of information that don't seem like much on their own. The potential fallout was massive. It wasn't just about the $600,000. It was about chipping away at our faith in the justice system. It was about the possibility that super clever frauds could just keep happening forever if nobody caught on. The credibility of the whole system was on the line. How on earth do you fake paralysis for that long? And how did the system, which is supposed to be so careful, miss something so major? The answer isn't just about how sneaky this guy was. It's also about how evidence actually looks and gets used in court. The whole "I'm a victim" story is super powerful, you know? It makes people feel for you, it makes them believe you. And when that story is backed up by what looks like solid medical opinions and you always seem disabled in public, it gets really, really tough to argue against. But then, there it was, one moment. Maybe he got careless, maybe it was just bad luck, but it was caught on camera. This wasn't just any video, it was the undoing of years of lies, the absolute proof that blew the whole thing wide open. The video from the courtroom, it showed him. Not the broken man he pretended to be, but someone who could actually move, who could walk. This huge, undeniable difference, this visual evidence that couldn't be ignored, became the key to exposing his fraud that had been going on for years. Source: NJ.com. The Social Security Administration, which was a big target here, they're always working hard to catch and prosecute people who rip off their programs. Source: SSA. They know how super important it is to keep benefits safe for folks who genuinely can't work. This whole situation shows a really big weak spot. How do we balance being sympathetic and assuming innocence with stopping and punishing people who pull off these huge deceptions? Going from a claim to a conviction is often really complicated, and higher courts often go back and check all the evidence and procedures to make sure everything was fair. Source: Case Law, FindLaw.com. This guy didn't just scam the Social Security Administration. He ripped off a bunch of different agencies, which really shows how far his lies spread and the system holes he took advantage of. In the end, he got jail time for it. Source: Justice.gov/USONJ. His sentence was a pretty harsh reminder that while the system can be fooled, it also has ways of making things right eventually. That $600,000 wasn't just cash. It was stolen hope, resources that went to the wrong place, and a massive betrayal of public trust. This story makes us ask some tough questions. How can we, as a society, make sure our support systems aren't being used by people faking hardship just to get money? And what does it really take to expose a lie that's been so carefully built over years? The answer, as we're gonna see, is all about undeniable proof, investigators who just won't quit, and those moments when a fake front finally starts to crumble. That picture that exposed him wasn't just a snapshot. It was the key that unlocked the truth. This is the story of the $600,000 paralysis lie, busted open by one photograph. And honestly, it tells us way more about how shaky trust can be than about how clever one person was. Stick around. You're about to see the whole picture. So the whole thing kicks off not with some big courtroom, aha moment, but with this nagging little doubt. It really started brewing in the head of a defense lawyer, the one looking over the case of this guy who, on paper, seemed like a real survivor against all the odds. This fella, he's claiming he's paralyzed, and get this, he's been collecting a good chunk of cash for years based on that. But something just wasn't sitting right. Man, talk about a tough spot for anyone digging into this, whether it's an investigator or a lawyer. How in the world do you prove someone isn't paralyzed, especially when it's something so complicated and, let's be honest, often hidden? This particular scammer, we're gonna call him Patient Zero. For this deep dive, he was seriously good. His whole paralysis story wasn't just talk. It was like a full-on, Oscar-worthy performance. Using people's minds against them is a seriously potent trick, and Patient Zero pulled it off with this creepy level of skill. His body language was just a masterclass in seeming helpless. Every single move, or more often the lack of movement, was totally planned to hammer home this idea that he couldn't move a muscle. His face. Super controlled, showing all the pain and frustration of a life stuck in a wheelchair. When asked questions, he'd sound so tired, his voice would crackle a bit, and his answers were super careful so nobody would catch him in a lie. This wasn't just about saying, "I'm disabled." It was about being it, every single day in front of doctors, the people managing his case, and probably anyone else who happened to see him. The uphill battle to even start looking into a claim like this is just enormous. Trying to show someone isn't disabled when they've convinced so many people they are. You're basically walking through a minefield of doctors' opinions and what society thinks is true. It can feel like you've got no chance. How do you actually find real proof against a condition that, by its very nature, is really hard to just see from the outside? That's where the real gritty detective work really kicks in, way out of those quiet doctors' rooms. Chasing down the truth in these supposed medical fraud cases. It really needs a bunch of different ways of investigating. The investigators, usually working super low-key, started by just watching what Patient Zero did when nobody important was looking. This meant quiet surveillance, carefully putting together little bits and pieces of his everyday life. They also checked out his social media. That online trail that for most folks is pretty open, but for someone really good at faking it, it's just a carefully put-together fantasy. The investigators were hunting for anything that didn't add up, any tiny moment where the act might slip. Talking to people who knew Patient Zero became another super important part of the puzzle. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances. What they said, even if they were a bit biased, could give little peeks into how he acted and what he did when he wasn't in the spotlight. Were there times he did stuff that totally went against his whole paralyzed story? Were there money troubles or reasons why he'd go through all this trouble to pull off such a big lie? The FBI, in their general write-ups about insurance fraud, they really emphasize just how much investigation goes into figuring out these scams, which cost billions every year. These methods often mean going way beyond the obvious stuff, looking for those tiny tells, those digital clues, and the human side of things that can either back up a story or totally blow a lie wide open. Source: FBI report case study, general fraud. The Social Security Administration, a big target for this kind of fraud, works hard to investigate and actually prosecute people trying to cheat their system. Their official guidelines really stress how serious these crimes are, and they know how much damage they do financially and to society as a whole. Source: government agency official site, SSA fraud. Patient Zero's alleged scam didn't just hit the SSA. It involved other government bodies too, making the whole thing even bigger and showing how many places he was trying to trick. And then the big break, the moment that carefully built wall started to fall apart, happened when nobody expected it. It wasn't some confession or a Freudian slip. It was a picture. Just one single, totally normal-looking photo that somehow held the power to rip apart years of lies. This photograph, taken maybe during that surveillance or maybe just from some public place where he thought nobody was watching, showed patient zero doing something that was absolutely impossible for someone in his claimed condition. It was a visual contradiction so blatant, so undeniable, that it instantly flipped the whole investigation upside down. That photograph became the absolute bedrock of the prosecution's case. It gave them the solid proof that the defense lawyers and investigators had been searching for like crazy. The higher courts, when they look at fraud convictions, they always carefully check out the evidence that was shown, and a photo like that. It's incredibly hard to argue with. Source: Court Records Appellate Decision Example. It proved right there in one snapshot that the paralysis was a total fake, just an act put on to get money. All those years of careful mind games, the controlled body movements, the fake expressions of pain, it all got undone by one simple, candid moment caught on camera. The sheer size of this deception was unbelievable, with reports saying the fraudster raked in over $600,000 in benefits by falsely claiming he was paralyzed. Source: Government press release. This wasn't just some small-time lie. This was a really smart, long-term scam against systems that were actually set up to help people who truly needed it. All right, let's inject some human flavor into this, shall we? We're gonna keep every single word, every single marker, and every single citation, just like you asked. No cutting corners here. So this whole elaborate act was starting to fall apart, big time. For ages, this one guy in New Jersey had totally fooled everyone, and you know the Social Security Administration was a big part of that, into believing he was completely paralyzed. He'd cruise around in a wheelchair, putting on a show, pretending he had some awful condition that kept his legs from working at all. And get this, the government bought it, hook, line, and sinker, shelling out over $600,000 in benefits. Source: Justice. gov/usenj/pr/New Jersey man sentenced prison defrauding Social Security Administration and other. This wasn't just some sad personal story. Nope, it was a straight-up, calculated scam that cost taxpayers a fortune. Insurance fraud, especially when folks fake injuries. It's a monster that costs billions every single year, and you bet it requires some serious digging to catch M. Source: FBI. gov/news/stories/insurance fraud cases 031715. But here's the thing about lies, right? They can only hold up for so long before they just snap. For this particular con, that snap came courtesy of one single killer photograph, and this wasn't just any old photo either. This picture caught the guy, not chilling in his wheelchair like usual, but doing something totally unguarded that blew his whole paralysis story right out of the water. The image showed him pulling off some physical stunt that would have been completely, utterly impossible if he really couldn't use his legs. The setting was key, too. This pic was snapped at a public event, a place where he probably figured nobody was really watching him, or at least not paying close attention to how he moved. It showed him standing, moving around, his legs working just fine. The whole fraud was exposed, not because of some long, drawn-out investigation, but thanks to some undeniable visual proof. The prosecution team, they knew they had him dead to rights. Their plan was super specific. Drop this photograph in court at just the right moment, you know, the absolute peak of the trial. It was designed to be that big aha reveal, the irrefutable evidence that would totally obliterate the story the guy had so carefully built. The courtroom, already buzzing with tension, was about to witness him get totally unmasked. When the prosecution finally pulled out that photograph, man, the reaction was intense. You could feel it. The guy's act, the composure he'd worked so hard to maintain, it just crumbled right there. His first move was denial, a desperate attempt to pretend the photo wasn't real. He actually claimed it was faked, a total fabrication. His lawyers were scrambling, trying to cook up any kind of explanation to save his narrative. But the picture was just too clear, and considering when and where it was taken, their efforts started looking pretty pathetic, frankly. And here's the kicker. That photo wasn't just tossed out there alone. It was backed up by a crucial witness. This person, who was actually at the event where the photo was taken, stepped up and gave sworn testimony. They confirmed exactly what the defendant was doing, which just hammered home the evidence from the picture even more. So it wasn't just a photo. It was proof of an actual event, confirmed by someone credible. And you know, appellate courts often have to look over fraud convictions, carefully checking out all the evidence to make sure everything was fair and square. Source: Case Law, FindLaw. com/us 3rd Circuit /1,676,648, HTML. The jury they just watched, their faces showing a mix of pure shock and that slow dawning of understanding. The judge, overseeing everything, could totally see that the game was up. All those years of deception, all those hundreds of thousands of dollars swiped from the Social Security Administration, it was finally coming out into the open. Source: SSA, gov/fraud/. The guy who swore up and down he couldn't walk was, in reality, totally capable of it, and the proof. Well, it was just impossible to argue with. Whoa, the fallout for the guy pulling this stunt? Pretty rough, seriously. He ended up with hard time behind bars and, get this, had to pay back all the cash he swindled. So this whole sentence, plus everyone seeing what he did, it's a super loud alarm bell for anyone else even thinking about pulling a fast one like this. The FBI points out that insurance scams, and this whole thing is a textbook example, are costing us billions every single year, which is why they need some seriously sharp detective work to nail the culprits. This whole mess also drops some major truth bombs for how the justice system works, you know. It really hammers home how crucial it is to do your homework, use tech smarts, and just plain refuse to give up when you're digging for the real story. That video from the courtroom, showing him walking around, clear as day. That was the killer evidence, the nail in the coffin for his whole elaborate act, proving just how awesome technology can be when you're trying to get to the bottom of things. Man, this just shows you how easily trust can get messed up. How could one person mess with the system for so long, yanking on the heartstrings, and taking resources that should be going to people who actually need them? And the damage isn't just about the money. It makes people stop believing in the systems designed to help, and it steers crucial support away from folks who are truly struggling. The Social Security Administration. Yeah, they're really going after these kinds of scams because they know how much damage these schemes cause. At the end of the day, this whole story is a big shout-out to how strong the truth really is. Even after all those years of lying, the whole carefully built house of cards came crashing down once the proof showed up. It's a really solid reminder that even though fraud might get away with it for a while, the truth, no matter how hard it is to find, usually finds a way to shine through, and sometimes it pops up in the most unexpected places.